While the infamous and deadly eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 is well known, there are also a number of recent times in the lower 48 states that a volcano took a step forward in the progression towards an eruption, but ultimately didn't end up erupting. Today's video is dedicated to those specific volcanic unrest episodes that largely went under the radar of the general public, although at least two of these examples are fairly well known. Starting off with the fifth closest a volcano got to producing an eruption, we have the Three Sisters volcano in Oregon, specifically during March 2004. That date marks when an earthquake swarm occurred, with more than 300 earthquakes occurring one after the other on March 23rd and 24th. These earthquakes are triggered by stress release of regional fault lines that received increased strain due to ongoing ground deformation, with the source of this ground deformation being a then ongoing magma intrusion centered about 3 miles west of the South Sister stratovolcano. This involved an estimated 40 million cubic meters of magma, which over a several-year time span rose to a depth of 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles below the surface. This magma intrusion had a composition of basalt and honestly never intruded any shallower than the aforementioned point. Thus, there never really was any true risk of an eruption occurring, with it later being discovered that magma had been intruding on and off since at least 1995 at a very low rate, with such still ongoing at a far weaker rate even today. Fourth on our list was the first to lead to visible surface effects. Well, at first, this background video which shows rows of dead trees might make them look to be the victim of an insect infestation or a fire. Neither of these is the case. Instead, this spot near Horseshoe Lake at the Mammoth Mountain volcano in California is dotted with warning signs like this. These trees were killed by lethal levels of carbon dioxide associated with a cooling magma intrusion, as yes, if carbon dioxide levels get too high, they can even kill plants. Mammoth Mountain has many of these tree kill areas, with I personally being able to count at least a dozen suspected regions. While some volcanoes have such areas in the long term, these literally popped into existence in 1989. That year, a deep, presumably low silica magma intrusion occurred beneath this California volcano, rising to 14.5 kilometers depth before ceasing its motion. This was still incredibly far away from ever producing an eruption, but represented an episode of volcanic unrest nevertheless. The third closest a volcano got to an eruption also occurred in California, specifically at the Lone Valley Caldera in 1982. On May 25, 1980, the start of a highly energetic earthquake swarm began, as strain from ongoing fresh uplift led to several magnitude 6 range earthquakes striking, followed by hundreds of lesser magnitude earthquakes. An intrusion of magma was rising through the crust, and by June 1982, a secondary branch of magma input would reach a mere 4 kilometers depth. Yet, despite the U.S. Geological Survey planning to issue a so-called Notice of Potential Hazard, which in terms of the modern scale would roughly equate to a volcano alert level halfway between green and yellow, this intrusion eventually ceased altogether. Second on our list, we travel to the northernmost active volcano in the lower 48, Mount Baker. On March 10, 1975, backpackers and locals alike looked up in horror to see that something significant had changed at the towering active glacier-covered stratovolcano. Whereas beforehand Mount Baker's summit area only occasionally produced faint hints of gas, there was now a towering plume of white gas which rose several thousand feet into the atmosphere and was accompanied by a notable roaring sound. The U.S. Geological Survey subsequently went to investigate and were also highly concerned by what they saw. At Sherman Crater, the vent which produced every single one of the last 10 of Mount Baker's eruptions, a previously snow and ice-covered vent was now completely devoid of ice and snow, instead being the site of a new crater lake. This was all caused by an intrusion of magma which reached around 2,200 meters below sea level before stalling, with degassing from this stalled magma rising to the surface. Degassing has declined every year since, although remained elevated when compared to pre-1975 levels. And for the volcano which got closest to erupting, we have the Mono Lake volcano in California, specifically on August 23, 1890. On that day, an unexpected earthquake storm and even possible rumbling occurred in close proximity to Mono Lake. Then, the water in a section of the lake turned an unusual color, and soon a plume of white-colored gas rose out of the middle of the lake, rising far above its surface. Turbulent, low-level fountaining of water then intermittently occurred, displaced by the abundant rising gas. In my opinion, what I interpret occurred on that day is that there nearly was a phreatic volcanic eruption at the bottom of this lake, but for whatever reason, the building pressure was released more slowly before it could be released all at once in a single explosion. Overall, with the exception of the Mono Lake activity in 1890, none of these unrest episodes were truly even remotely close to triggering a volcanic eruption. However, each instance of unrest caused a volcano to become technically closer to triggering an eruption than their typical normal background state. As a final note, I would like to thank this channel's patrons on Patreon and channel members on YouTube for supporting my work.